it says water 5,000 square feet of lawn. How does a homeowner water 10,000 square feet of lawn? Or can they?
Well, if it puts a limitation of 5,000 square feet of lawn and garden, that's all they can water. So if they are watering more than that, they're violating the terms of the well permit. And we actually had the water commissioner come into one of our subdivisions, and they went up and told the owners, you guys put in way more sod than you're supposed to. You need to pull out a bunch of your irrigated area and reduce it down to 5,000 square feet. Well, we as the architectural committee had approved 5,000 square feet. They just went and put in a bunch more because they thought it was cool. And they were mad when they had to pull it out.
And then how do you tell if a propane tank is leased?
If it's leaking?
If it's leased or owned, if the seller doesn't know, or, something.
Well, I would start by looking at the tank and see if there's a sticker on it from a propane company. If there's not, then I would ask the seller, do you own the tank or does somebody else own the tank? They typically know if they own the tank or not. If they go, no, I don't own it. Okay, who comes and fills it and checks it? Because they're paying the bills. You'll have to do some sleuthing to figure it out. Every now and again, I've run into one on the property. The guy says, I have no idea whose it is. And it was here when I bought it. I don't use it. And it's going to be here when I leave. So I'm not going to put that on the contract to be included in the bill of sale if the seller doesn't know he owns it. What I'm going to do is we're going to tell the buyer, it was here when the seller bought, and the seller intends to abandon it to the buyer when he goes. And the buyer can, if he wants to get the propane company to come and scope it out, then great. And if it's usable, great. I had one on property of my own, and the house burned down last Christmas. And I told him, I said, I want you guys I said, this tank has been here forever. I don't know if we own it or not, but it doesn't have anybody's sticker on it. If you guys will come take it, you can have it. I'm not giving you a bill of sale. I'll just abandon it to you. And they came, picked it up, and took it away. Got it off the property. That's what I wanted.
And then last question, how much do tanks cost?
I don't know. The last one I bought was a 1,000-gallon tank that we buried up on top of Whitmore Mountain. And I don't have any idea what we paid for it. I'm sure you can Google it and find them online.
Awesome. Thanks.
So, let's see. Cliff. Client that his wellhead was buried. Well, you want to unbury it. You want that wellhead above grade. Some of the older places, like you go out east and stuff out in the country, you might find old well pits, where the well was down in a pit. And so you pry off the 3 layers of rotting plywood off the top of it. And I never open those things up unless I have a torch with me, because I want to kill off all the spider webs and spiders that are down in that pit. God only knows, we opened one of it, was full of snakes, and they're nasty down in there. You're not allowed to do well pits anymore because they now require that the well be constructed where the wellhead comes above grade so that you don't have water and all kinds of nasty stuff getting down the well bore. So whenever we do have a property that has a well pit, we'll always recommend to the buyer that they have a well guy come out there and install some new casing to bring that wellhead above grade. That'd be the smart thing to do. All right, I'm going to go back to our screen share here. We're going to talk about septics. Okay, so this is just, there are different kinds of sewage disposal systems. They'll call them individual sewage disposal systems or on-site wastewater treatment systems, OWTSs. That's the current vernacular at our health department. And they all work essentially the same way. The raw sewage goes into a tank and the anaerobic bacteria start munching on it. And as they get digested, the solids settle to the bottom of the tank. and the scum layer floats up to the top, and in the middle is the effluent, the liquid, that gets up. And in the tank, there are two chambers with a baffle in between them, and as the water level rises, it goes over the baffle into the second chamber, where hopefully the rest of the solids settle out. And then there's an outlet baffle for the effluent to go out of the tank, just the liquid, because you don't want solids going into the leach field. And out they run into a leach field or a drain field out here, an absorption field, and gets distributed, and it works its way back down through the soil, and the aerobic bacteria in the leach field snarf on it there, and as it settles through the soil clarifies that water and allows it to return to the groundwater system. So that's essentially how a septic system works. Most counties will have a minimum separation requirement between a well, here's the well over on the left side of the picture, and the septic. In my county, it's 100 feet. So this may be important to know, particularly if you're selling small lots up in the mountains, because there are a lot of places back in the 50s and 60s where they did like, hey, we're doing a bunch of 1 acre lots up here. There was nothing to do but go out and survey them and put in roads and sell the lots. There was no subdivision criteria. So you go up there and you go, by the time I put a house on this lot with the slope where it's unbuildable, do I have adequate room to put a septic system and a well on that property? Because if you don't, you may not be able to get it. So there's additional due diligence buyers have to do to make sure that they can build what they want on their property. Okay? So this tank is supposed to be watertight so that stuff's not leaking out of it. So when they come to do septic inspections, what they're going to do is they're going to run a boatload of water through that septic tank system, which is why when buyers have the inspection done, they want to make sure the water is on in the house, because they want to make sure that the water continues to go out to the field and doesn't back up into the septic tank, because if it does, that means the leach field's got to clog someplace or it's saturated and may need to be replaced, and now we're talking big bucks. Okay. So what does a listing broker do? You need to contact the health department or go to this site, onlinerme.com. Okay? It's not highlighting properly. There we go. So Online RME is a national database where jurisdictions can store septic information. So in El Paso County, where I am, the requirement is that at time of sale, you have to have the septic system inspected by a certified inspector. That inspector will run his tests, and he will write up a report, and he will upload that report to the Online RME website. Somebody makes application to the county health department, pays them $65, and then they go and get that information off the Online RME site, and they review it, and they may go do their own inspection depending on what it says in the inspection report, and then they will issue a final acceptance document that says it looks like it's fine, or here are recommended repairs, or here are repairs you must complete within 90 days. So that would be important information for a buyer. I think everybody would agree. So we want to start by getting whatever septic records there are out there, and start with the health department, the county health department where your property lies, and check the RME site, and of course ask your seller, do you have any septic records as well? So I put it all together in chronological order, and I call that PDF file septic stuff. So when the buyer shows up, I send 2 files. Here's the well stuff, and here's the septic stuff. That's all we've got. And the buyer's got it, and everybody's happy. Okay? So you got to know what the county rules are. So I explain this septic inspection thing. So they come out and inspect. And one of the things they check is how thick is that sludge layer on the bottom of the tank. And if it gets to a certain depth, they're going to say, you know, it's time to pump the solids out of the tank. So they'll stick the hose down in there and they'll pump the tank and suck all the stuff out. But first they got to run their performance test where they run all the water through, and then they're going to pump it after that if it needs pumped. So if you intend for the seller to have the system inspected and pumped, you need to say inspected and pumped. If you say seller will have the septic system inspected per the county requirement, they'll have it inspected, but it may or may not get pumped depending on what the report says. Okay? Because sometimes they go, yeah, we just pumped it 6 months ago. It doesn't have any solids in it, and the septic guys go, doesn't need pumped. So why pay the extra for pumping? Septic tanks typically have to be pumped every 3 to 5 years. Every now and again, I go list a property, and the owner proudly tells me, yeah, I've lived here 30 years, never pumped that tank once because I put bicarbonate of soda down my septic or whatever it is they throw in there, you know, septic rid, a Ridex, I think, whatever it is. So, yeah, I don't have any problem with going, oh, no, dear God. I said, okay, well, we probably need to get that pumped. Well, why? It hasn't backed up. Yeah, but you may be sending toilet paper and solids out into the leach field and clogging your pipes. And if you do that, there's no fix for it other than to dig them up and replace them. So in El Paso County, this is a sample contingency that could go in a contract. Property uses an OWTS for sewage treatment as required by, and I write it this way because I don't want the seller thinking that they just can waive this thing. So it's as required by El Paso County, the seller at seller's expense will be responsible for having it inspected, pumped after inspection, because we typically will ask for that, and getting the county acceptance document. So we have no control over how fast they get this stuff done. So we could say, well, I want it done within 2 weeks. And they're going to go, yeah, that's nice. We're not going to get it done in 2 weeks. You know, we're in the middle of pandemic. That's the excuse for every delay anymore. And so they go, we'll get to you when we get to you. And then the county will get to you with their letter when they get to you. So because I can't control when this gets done, all I can control is seller will order it within 7 days after MEC, and the buyer has the right to object pursuant to 10.3 before the later of the inspection objection deadline or 2 days after they get the county results. So this part behooves the seller to jump on this thing and get it going early on. I'm a strong believer in getting all due diligence loaded to the front end of the transaction. Get the buyer spending money, get the seller spending money, it increases the odds they will close. Okay? So that's one for El Paso County. There's another one I put in here from Frascona, Joyner, Goodman, and Greenstein. This is their one for Jefferson County. So up there, they call their inspection a use permit, apparently. So if you say to me, well, did you get a use permit? I'm like, what do you mean? They don't call them use permits here. Apparently they do up there. There's the term use permit. So there is no contingency in the contract for these inspections. Even though it's a county requirement, you still have to write it in so that the buyer and seller agree the seller is going to do the thing. Because the worst scenario, I've got one of these cases right now, the broker didn't know about the septic inspection requirement in El Paso County. He came from another area, came from Denver. So he wrote up the property, had the wrong legal description. He had 40 acres instead of 80 acres. And he didn't put in the septic inspection requirement. Well, the buyer and the buyer's broker apparently didn't know about it either because they didn't say anything. And so the buyer closes and has problems with the septic, calls the health department. The health department says, well, it's sold. You guys were supposed to get the septic inspection done. That was the septic system now, a new one. So they're suing the broker for negligence. So we need to know what we're doing when it comes to this well and septic stuff. Ask questions. This is a kind of a cross section of a septic tank. Here's the raw sewage coming in on the left. Goes in here, your sludge layer, your liquid layer, and your scum layer. Okay, and then we have this other baffle over here in the middle where it goes up this pipe, the liquid does, and then works its way over into this side. The last of the sludge settles out, and then here's our outlet baffle going to the leach field. And when they inspect these things, they'll pull the lids off and they'll run a bunch of water in here, and they're looking at this level on the outlet side of the tank over on this side, because what they want to see is, after they run the water for 20 or 30 minutes, is the water level in this side of the tank staying constant, or is this rising up? Because if it is, that means we've got a problem. These outlet baffles, because they're initially made typically of concrete, they get deteriorated and they dissolve eventually in the gases created by the septic, so they might have to put in a new PVC outlet baffle. But those are typical things that they'll do during the inspections. Okay. So any questions on septic stuff? Okay. Then we will move on to water-related rights in contracts. Okay. So let me give you the first thing that you do not put into the deeded water rights section. Those of record. That means that's a broker that doesn't know what they're doing. First off, most water rights are not of record, meaning they are not recorded in the real estate records of the county where the property lies. Water rights are typically created by court decree. There are 7 water divisions in the state. Each one has its own water court. The divisions correspond to the drainage basins. So like Denver's in the Platte River drainage basin. Colorado Springs, where I am, we're in the Arkansas River basin. Our court is in Pueblo. Your court is in Greeley. And as with all court cases, the cases are filed with the clerk of court, the clerk of the water court, where it was done. You may be able to go on the Division of Water Resources if you're willing to spend a little time and learn how to do it, and you may find the water decrees there. So, if you don't know if there's any water rights or not, you need to talk to the seller and ask the seller. That's usually a question I will ask them in writing. Are you aware of any water rights that you own with this property? Which brings me up a point. When you list property, do not just rely on the assessor's website. Call up the title company, call our sponsor here. Hey, I need an ownership and encumbrances report, and what I would like is any deeds into the seller related to the property. Because, and I say it that way on purpose, because a lot of times the land is conveyed separately from the water rights, because maybe they got a warranty deed for the land. Nobody in their right mind is going to give you a warranty deed for water rights. They probably got a bargain and sale deed or a quitclaim deed for the water rights. And so that's 2 separate deeds. If you look at the assessor's page, it's only going to show you the water right, or it's only going to show you the land deed, most likely. And so you may not know. So you need to ask the seller whether they know if they have any water rights or not. Okay? So, you can search for water rights. Maybe you can find some. But it's something that should be on your questioning checklist from the seller. And if you use checklists when you list property, it's very beneficial to you, because then you won't forget to ask questions. Remember, title company is not going to prepare certain kinds of deeds. They're not going to prepare deeds for water rights. They're not going to prepare trustee deeds, and they're not going to prepare personal representative deeds. So if you have a trust or an estate, you're going to have somebody else prepare the deed unless you're going to prepare it. And you probably shouldn't do that unless you know how to prepare the deeds. Um, but water rights deeds, typically they're going to wind up having to get an attorney prepare that unless you know how to do it. So if you look in the contract, I think I've got a section in here. Yeah, I do. So if you look in our buy-sell agreement in 2.7, you will see this. Each one has a checkbox next to it, 2.71, 2, 3, 4, and 5. There's a reason why they separated. So the first one is deeded water rights. Those are ones that you're going to give a deed to. There's a water rights decree for the property. Other water rights could be typically a lease. I don't own the water rights, but I have a lease from my neighbor for grazing for the rest of the year. So seller's going to assign that lease to the buyer. The buyer will assume the lease, but there you wouldn't deed that. You do lease conveyance by a lease assignment, right? So deeded water rights get conveyed by some kind of a deed. My recommendation to you is bargain and sale deed. Okay. You might get a special warranty deed from the seller if the seller is the one that generated the water right. In other words, if they're the one that went to court and got the water right, so it's never been anywhere else, they might give you a special warranty deed, but most people are not going to warrant the title to water rights that they didn't start out with, that they didn't initiate, I'll put it that way. So I like bargain and sale deed for water rights. That's what I personally use. Okay. Next section is well rights. How do you convey a well? So these are conveyed by deed. This is conveyed by probably assignment or some other kind of document. How are the well rights transferred? The well permit transfer form that gets signed at closing. That's how they are transferred. And then there's a place in our contract to write in the well permit number in 2.7.3. Okay? And remember, if you can't find a well permit, then you're going to be into that well registration business. Next section, water stock certificates. Okay? How do you convey stock? Anybody know how you convey stock? Well, by assignment, right? So some sort of an assignment, because water stock is a personal property interest. It's not real property. It's just evidence of ownership of an interest in water. But let's use a ditch company, for example. We have somebody that's looking at a ditch. Somebody in class is looking at a ditch issue now. They're talking about getting water shares. If you're the listing broker and the seller goes, yeah, I got 2 shares of the Brandex ditch, then you go, you have the contact information from the Brandex ditch company because I need to call and talk to them. And the reason you would call and talk to them as the seller's broker is you go, tell me how you guys handle assignments of water stock at your ditch company, because each one has its own process for getting it done. You cannot rely on the title company to know who to contact or how to handle it. Particularly if you have a title company like the one that we just got foisted on us on a deal, on a $1.2 million deal. The listing brokers in California, some national franchise they're trying to get started, but the listing broker is in California. That's where he primarily works. He's got a Colorado license. The title company's based out of Chicago, and the processing department for the title company's in Florida. They sent us escrow instructions as though we were an escrow state. They screwed so many things up. So insist on a local title company. And if you're dealing with an area where you have ditch rights, definitely get a title company that knows that area and knows who to contact at the ditch companies, because you're going to have to talk to the secretary down there and go, what forms do we need to have filled out at closing for the buyer to assign to the seller? You also want to verify that your seller actually can physically lay hands on the stock certificates, because if the seller has lost them, he's going to have to pay money, and it's going to take time to get replacements. And if he doesn't produce them at closing, remember that per diem penalty that you wrote in there, $300 a day for failure to timely deliver possession? Oops. You don't want to have to wait for a month until the board of directors meets again at the ditch company to issue new certificates. Plus, they may have to buy a lost instrument bond. So find out if your seller has the stock certificates in hand so that they have them ready for closing, because they may have to surrender those. And if they don't have to surrender them, they're probably going to have to flip them over and write assignment information on the back of the certificates. So you need to talk to the ditch company. Okay, and then water and sewer taps. How do you convey water and sewer taps? Anybody ever done water and sewer tap conveyance? Anybody? Nobody's ever conveyed water and sewer taps from seller to buyer? Okay, well, you don't do it with a deed, and you probably don't do it with an assignment. You probably have to go to the provider of the water and sewer, go to the districts, because a lot of times the water and sanitation departments are two separate entities. We have one in our area where the water is municipal and the sewer is private. So you have to go to both entities in that case and go, we're selling this property. We intend for the seller to convey the prepaid taps to the buyer. What do we need to do with your entity in order to be able to adequately have you change that in your records so that our buyer now is going to be the owner of those taps? So you'll have to find out from them what's required in order to convey those taps. Okay, so that's why they separate each of these into 2.71 through 5, is because each kind of water interest is conveyed by a separate document, which is why they write down here in 276, you'll convey by the appropriate legal document. Okay, so you just have to find out what water interests are there. And if, for example, there's a well and you intend to convey the well, don't forget to check the box. Remember, our contract says if you don't check the box, that section is deemed to be not applicable. So I see brokers write stuff in over here and then not check the box, and it raises a question. Were they trying to include something, or is it just deleted and they were writing extraneous stuff into the contract? Okay. All right. This one was kind of interesting. And somebody came up to me in a class on the Western Slope, and they had a copy of a deed that said, the seller is deeding to the buyer 4 cubic feet per second of Branch Creek, in this case number, which is a water right, water and sewer tap, well permit number such and such, some ditch stock, and a lease for some ditch stock. So the question is, what actually got conveyed to the buyer by that deed? The answer is it's hard to tell. For sure, the water rights up here did. Don't know about the rest of this stuff, because as we just got done talking about it, the seller has to convey these other things by different kinds of documents. At best, it indicates that the seller had the intent to convey this stuff. So if there's ever a fight over who owns it down the road, at least the buyer has something to hang their hat on. But these don't belong in the deed. So I asked the guy, I said, whose idea was it to put all these things in the deed? He said, the water attorney. I'm like, oh. I said, well, hopefully his malpractice insurance is paid up and things worked out. Small community, so maybe it's not going to be a problem there. But hopefully that discussion helps you understand better why those are separated into separate sections and that each one is conveyed by a different type of conveyance. Okay, so stock shares are personal property, water rights are real property, a well permit isn't anything, it's just a permit to use water. It's not a real property interest. So that's why it's conveyed separately. Okay, leasehold interests, typically you'll have some sort of a lease assignment, just like if you sell a house that has a tenant in it. The tenant's going to remain in the property, or you sell investment property that has tenants in it, and you have to assign the leases from the seller to the buyer. So the seller will sign a piece of paper that says seller hereby assigns the following leases to the buyer, and the buyer hereby accepts them. It's a really simple little thing. There's no commission approved form, although I just talked to Kent Levine last month and said, that would be a nice thing for the real estate commission to put out as a lease assignment form, so that we don't have to cook them up ourselves to have that done. And he didn't think it was that big a deal, but I put the bug in his ear anyway. So leases have to be assigned to the buyer. And then don't forget, if there's any deposits with those leases, those have to show up on the settlement statement, where you charge the seller and credit the buyer to transfer the deposits, any security deposits, to the buyer. Okay, so that's some stuff there. Here's your flow chart on well stuff that Kay will send out to you. So at this point, let me just take questions, because I'm sure there typically are some about this time of the day. So what kind of questions do y'all have about this stuff?
This is Anzo Phelps. I have a lot of the remaining lots in Castle Plains Village listed, and we do assign the water and sewer taps, but it's vacant property. It's vacant land. And we assign them to the buyer at closing. The assignment letter the original goes to the Metro District, and they get a copy.
Okay, so if that's the workout that the district is willing to accept, that's fine. I'm just suggesting that the listing broker